Hello, everyone. I'm your sleep sinners for tonight, here to guide you into a peaceful and mysterious slumber. I know many of you use these videos to help you fall asleep. So before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, I'd love to know where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now. Go ahead, get comfortable, relax, and let the rain and stories take you away. The Shibito of Shikoku, Japan. Chapter 1. The Path. Kazuki Takahashi squinted at his phone screen, checking the map once more as the bus pulled away from the tiny mountain station. The cellular signal faded in and out, the little loading icon spinning endlessly. Typical. The one time he actually needed GPS. No worries, he muttered, switching to airplane mode to save battery. He'd downloaded the trail map beforehand, having learned from past adventures that preparation was key. At 23, Kazuki considered himself an experienced solo traveler, though this was his first time tackling the famous Shikoku Henro pilgrimage route. His friends back in Tokyo thought he was low-key insane for doing this alone. It's literally 2025. Who goes on an ancient Buddhist pilgrimage instead of virtual reality tourism? His roommate Daisuke had asked when Kazuki packed his backpack, and you're not even religious. Kazuki couldn't explain it properly, but after 4 years of grinding through university and landing a soul-crushing corporate job, he needed something real, something that wasn't filtered through screens or algorithms. The centuries-old pilgrimage route connecting 88 temples across Shikoku Island called him in a way that made no logical sense. He'd taken 2 weeks off work, though he only planned to visit a section of the full route. Even that had required intense negotiation with his micromanaging boss. The mountain air felt different as he adjusted his backpack straps and started walking. Cleaner, alive. The early April weather was perfect. Cool but not cold, with cherry blossoms just beginning to bloom. Pink petals occasionally drifted down onto the ancient stone path. 3 hours and several shrines later, Kazuki stopped at a particularly beautiful wooden temple nestled against the mountainside. According to his guide, this was Ryazenji, the first official temple of the pilgrimage. The structure looked ancient yet perfectly maintained, its curved roof rising gracefully against a backdrop of pines and distant mountains. No one else was around. Perfect. Kazuki pulled out his phone to take some photos. He promised his sister may he document the journey, though he wasn't planning to spam social media with updates. This was for himself. He positioned himself in front of the temple's entrance gate, held his phone out at arm's length, and snapped a quick selfie. Then another, and one more for good measure. Only after he'd continued his hike did he check the photos. The first looked good. He was smiling, the temple gate perfectly framed behind him. But something in the second photo made him pause. At the edge of the frame, barely visible in the shadows beneath the temple's eaves, stood a figure. Someone in dark traditional clothing with what looked like a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. Kazuki zoomed in, but the figure was too blurry to make out clearly. Probably just another pilgrim, he thought, swiping to the third photo. His thumb froze midair. The same figure was there again, but now it stood closer to him, perhaps 10 feet behind where he'd been standing. The face remained hidden under the hat, but Kazuki could make out pale hands folded in front of dark robes. What the... he muttered, glancing back toward the temple, now 100 yards behind him. Nobody was following him on the trail. At least, nobody he could see. A chill ran up his spine, despite the pleasant temperature. He told himself it was just another traveler who happened to be moving around while he took his photos. Nothing strange about that. So why did his heart rate suddenly spike? Kazuki continued along the path, but now he found himself looking over his shoulder every few minutes. The trail wound through stands of bamboo and pine, occasionally offering glimpses of valleys far below. In any other circumstances, he would have found it peaceful. An hour later, he reached the next shrine on his itinerary. Gokuraku-ji was smaller than the previous temple, but equally beautiful, with stone lanterns lining the approach. Again, he seemed to be the only visitor. This time, Kazuki surveyed the area carefully before taking photos. No sign of anyone else. He walked around the shrine, inspecting shadowy corners and alcoves. Nothing but stone statues and swaying branches. Satisfied he was alone, he took several photos of the shrine itself before setting up another selfie at the entrance. 3 quick shots, and then he checked them immediately. His breath caught in his throat. In the first picture, he was alone. In the second, the figure appeared at the edge of the shrine grounds. And in the third, the figure stood directly behind him, no more than 5 feet away. Kazuki spun around, heart hammering, but saw nothing except empty stone steps and swaying trees. "Hello?" he called out, his voice sounding small in the vast mountain silence. "Is someone there?" No response except the soft rustle of leaves and distant bird song. With trembling fingers, he zoomed in on the third photo. The figure wore the traditional outfit of a Henro pilgrim, dark robes and a sedge hat, but something was off about the proportions. The hands that protruded from the sleeves seemed too long, the fingers unnaturally thin, and the face beneath the hat remained completely hidden in shadow, despite the bright afternoon light. Kazuki felt a new sensation creeping up his spine, not just fear but a profound sense of wrongness, as if the natural order had been disturbed. He swallowed hard, suddenly regretting his decision to travel alone. "Just my imagination," he said aloud, though he didn't believe it. "Or someone messing with me." He continued down the path, walking faster now. The trail descended through a dense forest, the canopy overhead blocking much of the sunlight. The temperature seemed to drop with each step. Kazuki couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The back of his neck tingled continuously, and every rustle in the undergrowth made him flinch. He'd never been one to scare easily, but something about those photos. When he reached Jirakaji, the next temple on his route, the sun was already beginning to dip toward the horizon. The shadows had lengthened, and the temple's weathered stones seemed to absorb what little light remained. This time, Kazuki didn't wait. He pulled out his phone and snapped a quick photo of the temple, without himself in the frame. Then he held his breath as he examined the image. There, standing beside one of the temple's stone lanterns, was the figure, closer now in the photo than it had been at the previous sites. The dark robe seemed to absorb the light around them, creating a void in the image. Kazuki's hands were shaking so badly, he nearly dropped his phone. This wasn't possible. Whatever was happening defied explanation. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "I know you're there. This isn't funny." Again, no response except the wind and distant birds. Kazuki called his sister. The call went straight to voicemail. "May, it's me," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Something weird is happening. I'm at..." His phone beeped once, then died. He'd been sure it had at least 40% battery left. But the screen remained black no matter how many times he pressed the power button. The sun sank lower, shadows stretching across the temple grounds like grasping fingers. Kazuki felt panic rising in his chest. Should he continue to the next station? Go back? There was a small and another 2 miles ahead where he'd booked a room for the night. But suddenly the thought of spending the night alone in these mountains filled him with dread. As he stood there indecisive, a voice spoke from behind him, soft and rasping, like dry leaves scraping against stone. "Oh, Henro-san," it said. "You walk the path." Kazuki whirled around, his heart nearly stopping. An old woman stood there, bent with age but with bright, alert eyes. She wore the practical clothing of a rural Japanese grandmother, work pants, a weathered jacket, sensible shoes. Her deeply lined face suggested she was well into her 80s. "You startled me," Kazuki said, one hand pressed to his chest. "I didn't hear you approach." "Few do," the old woman replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She glanced at the temple, then back at Kazuki. "You have seen it, haven't you? In your pictures." Kazuki's mouth went dry. "You know about that? What is it? Who's following me?" The old woman sighed, leaning on a walking stick that Kazuki hadn't noticed before. "Not who. What? The locals call a Shibito a dead person, but that's not quite right." She looked around as if checking that they were alone. "Some say they're those who fail to complete the pilgrimage, souls trapped between worlds. Others say they are much older than the pilgrimage itself, guardians of these mountains from before Buddhism came to our shores." "But why is it following me?" The old woman's eyes narrowed. "It shows itself to those it has chosen. As for why," she shrugged, "perhaps you carry something it wants. Perhaps you stand at a crossroads in your life. The Shibito are drawn to transitions, to moments of change." A cold wind blew through the temple grounds, rustling the prayer papers hanging from nearby racks. The sun had nearly set now, casting long shadows across the stones. "What should I do?" Kazuki asked, hating how small his voice sounded. The old woman considered him for a long moment. "There's a small shrine, not marked on any pilgrim maps. It stands at the fork in the path, half a mile ahead. Go there before nightfall." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small paper amulet. Pressing it into his hand, "Place this at the shrine, and perhaps the Shibito will leave you in peace." Before Kazuki could ask more questions, the old woman turned and walked away, moving with surprising speed for someone her age. Within moments, she had disappeared around a bend in the path. Kazuki looked down at the amulet in his hand. It was inscribed with characters he couldn't read, not modern Japanese, but something older. He slipped it into his pocket and, with one last uneasy glance at the temple, continued along the path. The daylight was fading fast now. Kazuki turned on his phone's flashlight, relieved to find that it worked despite the battery apparently being dead. The trail ahead split into two, just as the old woman had said. The main path continued downhill toward what he assumed was the inn, while a smaller, less traveled route branched off into the forest. Without hesitation, Kazuki took the forest path. The trees closed in around him, branches interlacing overhead to block out the last of the twilight. His flashlight beam carved a narrow tunnel through the darkness ahead. After about 10 minutes of walking, he saw it, a small, weathered shrine nestled against the trunk of a massive cedar tree. It was simple, just a small wooden structure with sloped roof, clearly ancient but somehow untouched by decay. No markings identified it. No signs indicated its purpose. Kazuki approached slowly, his footsteps crunching on fallen leaves. The forest around him had gone silent. No birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind through the branches. He reached into his pocket for the amulet, but before he could place it on the shrine, his phone chimed. Somehow, impossibly, it had turned itself back on, and it was taking pictures, one after another. The camera app fired, the flash illuminating the forest in harsh bursts of light. Kazuki tried to stop it, pressing buttons frantically, but nothing happened. The phone continued its automated photography, each flash revealing more of the surrounding forest. And with each flash, he saw them, standing among the trees, dark robes, wide-brimmed hats, dozens of them. With each flash, they were closer. Flash, 20 yards away. Flash, 10 yards. Flash, 5 yards. The final flash revealed them surrounding him completely, a circle of dark figures, their faces hidden in shadow despite the harsh light, their pale, elongated hands extended toward him, inches from his face. Then the phone died, plunging him into total darkness. Kazuki screamed, fumbling in his pocket for the amulet. His fingers closed around it just as something cold and damp brushed against his cheek. He slammed the paper amulet onto the shrine and collapsed to his knees, eyes squeezed shut, waiting for whatever would come next. Nothing happened. After what felt like an eternity, Kazuki opened his eyes. Dawn light filtered through the trees. Somehow, impossibly, the entire night had passed in what it felt like seconds. He was alone. The shrine stood before him, the amulet now gone. His phone lay on the ground beside him. The screen cracked but functional. The battery showed 100% charged. With shaking hands, Kazuki picked it up and checked the photos. Nothing unusual appeared in any of them, just blurry shots of a forest at night. No figures. No Shibito. He rose to his feet, his legs stiff and cold. The morning air was crisp, birds singing in the trees as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't spent the night surrounded by whatever they were. Kazuki turned to leave, eager to return to the main trail, to civilization, to normality. But something made him look back at the small shrine one last time. There, where he had placed the amulet, now lay a small stone carved in the shape of a pilgrim. Its features were worn smooth, but Kazuki could make out the wide-brimmed hat and flowing robes. And beneath it, carved into the shrine's wooden base, was a message in modern Japanese. The journey continues. Chapter 2. The shadows deepen. Kazuki practically ran back to the main trail, his heart pounding against his ribs. The morning sunlight did little to dispel the terror of the previous night. Every shadow among the trees looked like a figure in robes. Every rustle of leaves sounded like whispering voices. When he finally reached the inn, a traditional Japanese ryokan nestled against a mountainside, he must have looked as bad as he felt. The elderly innkeeper, Tanaka-san, took one look at him and ushered him inside without asking questions. Bath first, then breakfast, the man said firmly, leading Kazuki to the bathing area. You've had a difficult journey, I think. Kazuki didn't argue. He soaked in the hot mineral water until his fingers pruned, trying to wash away the memory of those pale hands reaching for him in the darkness. But no matter how hot the water, he couldn't seem to get warm. After changing into the yukata provided by the inn, Kazuki checked his phone again. The photos from the night before remained stubbornly normal, just blurry shots of trees and darkness. No evidence of what he'd seen. No proof that any of it had happened. Had he imagined it all? A hallucination brought on by exhaustion and isolation? But the old woman had been real. The amulet had been real. And the stone pilgrim left at the shrine, that had been real too. Hadn't it? Breakfast was a traditional Japanese spread. Grilled fish, miso soup, pickled vegetables, and rice. Kazuki ate mechanically, barely tasting the food. Only 2 other guests were present. An elderly couple who spoke quietly to each other in the corner. They nodded politely to Kazuki, but otherwise left him alone. When Tanaka-san came to clear away the dishes, Kazuki cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said. "Do you know about a small shrine in the forest, just off the main path?" The innkeeper's hand stilled momentarily. "Many small shrines these mountains," he said carefully. "Some very old. This one was beside a huge cedar tree. Very simple, no markings." Tanaka-san's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "Ah, that one. Yes, it's best left alone. Not part of the official pilgrimage." "What is it for?" Kazuki pressed. "Who built it?" The innkeeper glanced at the elderly couple, who were now listening with undisguised interest. "It's said to be a boundary shrine," he finally said. "A place where the veil between worlds is thin. The old ones built it to contain something, or to keep something out." He shrugged. "Just local superstition, of course." But his eyes told a different story. "And the Shibito?" Kazuki asked. "What do you know about them?" This time, Tanaka-san's reaction was unmistakable. He nearly dropped the tray he was holding. The elderly couple exchanged alarmed glances. "Young man," the innkeeper said, his voice low, "it's best not to speak of such things, especially not here in these mountains." He leaned closer. "If you have encountered something unusual, I suggest you complete your pilgrimage quickly and return to the city. Some mysteries are better left unsolved." With that, he straightened up and walked away, leaving Kazuki with more questions than answers. After breakfast, Kazuki retreated to his room and called his sister again. This time, the call connected. "Kazu, I was getting worried," May said. "You didn't text yesterday." "Sorry," Kazuki replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Reception is spotty up here. How's the pilgrimage going? Having your big spiritual awakening yet?" He could hear the teasing smile in her voice. Kazuki hesitated. Should he tell her about the Shibito? About the night at the shrine? She'd think he was crazy. Or worse, she'd worry. "It's interesting," he said finally. "Beautiful country. Lots of history. Send me pics." "I will. Later. Battery's low." After a few more minutes of small talk, Kazuki ended the call, feeling guilty for the half-truths. But what could he tell her? That he was being followed by supernatural entities that only appeared in photographs? He spent the morning in his room, researching on his phone. Service was weak, but he managed to find some information about the Shikoku pilgrimage and its history. Nothing about Shibito specifically, but there were references to mountain spirits and guardian deities associated with the route. One article mentioned that pilgrims traditionally travel with companions, partly for safety, but also because solo travelers sometimes reported strange experiences, particularly at dusk and dawn. The article was vague about what these experiences entailed. By midday, Kazuki had made a decision. He would continue the pilgrimage, but modify his route to reach the nearest train station by tomorrow evening. No more nights alone in the mountains. He packed his belongings and thanked Tanaka-san for the hospitality. The innkeeper watched him with knowing eyes. "Be careful on the path," the old man said as Kazuki prepared to leave. "And remember, do not take photographs after sunset." Before Kazuki could ask why, the innkeeper had disappeared back into Ryokan. The day was clear and warm as Kazuki resumed his journey. The trail here was wider, better maintained. Clearly part of the main pilgrimage route. He passed other travelers occasionally, exchanging brief nods of acknowledgement. The presence of other people helped calm his nerves. By mid-afternoon, he had visited 2 more temples without incident. No strange figures appeared in his photos. No old women approached him with cryptic warnings. The events of the previous day began to feel distant, dreamlike. Maybe it had been a hallucination after all, or an elaborate prank by locals who enjoyed scaring city tourists. The third temple of the day, Komioji, perched dramatically on a cliff overlooking a river valley. The view was breathtaking. Mountains stretching to the horizon, their slopes covered in forest just beginning to show the first green of spring. Kazuki took several photos, both of the temple and the landscape. When he checked them, he felt a wave of relief. Normal pictures. No mysterious figures. As he was about to continue on his way, a monk emerged from the temple. He was middle-aged, with a shaved head and traditional robes. His face was kind but serious. "You travel alone," the monk said. It wasn't a question. Kazuki nodded. Most unusual these days, especially for one so young. The monk studied him. "You have encountered something on your journey." Again, not a question. Kazuki hesitated, then nodded. "The Shibito," he said quietly. The monk didn't look surprised. "They have shown themselves to you. In your photographs, yes?" "How did you know?" "It is their way. They exist between moments, between heartbeats. The camera catches what the eye cannot. the spaces in between. The monk gestured for Kazuki to follow him to a stone bench overlooking the valley. But you have seen them directly as well, haven't you? At the boundary shrine. Kazuki's mouth went dry. Yes, last night. There were many of them. The monk nodded gravely. And yet you survived. Interesting. An old woman gave me an amulet to place at the shrine. After that, they disappeared. Ah. The monk's expression softened. Tanaka Sachiko. She has helped many travelers over the years. You know her? Of course. She has tended the boundary shrine for decades. Something cold settled in Kazuki's stomach. But the innkeeper Tanaxan is her son, yes. He worries about her, walking these mountains alone at her age. The monk smiled slightly, though she knows these paths better than anyone. Kazuki felt a growing sense of unease. The Shibito, what do they want from me? The monk was silent for a long moment, gazing out over the valley. It is not a question of want, he said finally. They simply are, like the mountains, like the sky. They exist in the spaces we cannot see, in the moments between breaths. He turned to look directly at Kazuki, but they are drawn to certain people, those at crossroads in their lives, those who seek something, even if they do not know what they seek. I'm just a tourist, Kazuki protested. I'm not seeking anything. The monk raised an eyebrow. Are you not? Why leave your city life to walk an ancient pilgrimage route? Why come alone when most young people travel in groups? Kazuki had no answer. He stared down at his hands. The Shibito are not evil, the monk continued. They are simply other. They exist outside our understanding of time and space. They see all possible paths a life might take. He paused. Some say they collect those who interest them. Others say they guide travelers to their true paths. Collect. Kazuki asked, his voice rising. What does that mean? There are stories, the monk said carefully, of pilgrims who disappeared on these mountains, who walked into the forest and never returned. Some say they found another path, one that led somewhere else entirely. A cloud passed over the sun, casting the valley into momentary shadow. Kazuki shivered despite the warm air. How do I make them leave me alone? The monk smiled sadly. The amulets of Chiko-san bought you time, nothing more. The Shibito have marked you. They will return. He reached into his sleeve and withdrew a small bundle wrapped in silk. Take this. It contains salt from the temple, blessed by monks for 100 years. Carry it with you. It cannot keep them away entirely, but it will give you clarity when they are near. Kazuki accepted the bundle, tucking it into his pocket next to his phone. Thank you, he said, but I still don't understand. Why me? What makes me special? Perhaps nothing, the monk replied, or perhaps something only they can see. He stood. I must return to my duties. Continue your journey with an open heart, Takahashi-san. And remember, the path you walk has been walked by millions before you. You are never truly alone. Kazuki blinked. How did you know my name? I never told you. But the monk was already walking away, back toward the temple. He didn't turn around. The sun was beginning its descent as Kazuki continued along the trail. According to his map, the next temple was only an hour's walk, and beyond that was a small town where he could find accommodation for the night. As he walked, the monk's words echoed in his mind. The Shibito have marked you. They will return. The bundle of blessed salt felt heavy in his pocket, though it couldn't have weighed more than a few ounces. The path descended from the mountains into a forest of tall cedars and cypress. The light filtered through the canopy in dusty beams, creating a cathedral-like atmosphere. Under different circumstances, Kazuki would have found it beautiful. Now, every shadow seemed to hide a figure in dark robes. Every rustle in the undergrowth made him flinch. Halfway to the next temple, Kazuki came across a small wooden bridge spanning a stream. The water bubbled noisily over rocks below, crystal clear and ice cold from the mountain snowmelt. As he crossed the bridge, something caught his eye, a figure standing in the middle of the stream, ankle deep in the rushing water. A child, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, wearing a school uniform. Kazuki froze. The child stood perfectly still, facing downstream, seemingly oblivious to the frigid water, soaking their shoes and socks. "Hey!" Kazuki called out. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" The child didn't respond, didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. Kazuki took a hesitant step closer. "Can you hear me? Do you need help?" Slowly, with unnatural smoothness, the child turned to face him. Kazuki's blood ran cold. Where the face should have been was nothing but shadow, a dark void beneath neatly combed hair. Yet somehow, impossibly, Kazuki felt it looking at him, studying him. Then the child lifted one hand and pointed directly at Kazuki. Its arm extended too far, the limbs stretching impossibly across the distance between them. Kazuki stumbled backward, nearly falling off the bridge. He fumbled in his pocket for the salt bundle the monk had given him, tearing it open with trembling hands. White crystals spilled over his fingers. On instinct, he flung the salt toward the child thing in the stream. The air seemed to warp where the salt flew, as if reality itself was bending. The child figure distorted, its body elongating and contracting like a reflection in rippling water. Its arm, still pointing at Kazuki, stretched and twisted, the fingers spreading like roots. Then, between one heartbeat and the next, it was gone. The stream flowed undisturbed, as if nothing had been standing there at all. Kazuki stood frozen for several seconds, his heart hammering against his ribs. Then he ran. He ran as he'd never run before, feet pounding on the dirt path, lungs burning, branches whipping past his face. He didn't stop until he reached the next temple, Horenji, bursting to the gate like a man pursued by demons. A startled attendant looked up from sweeping the courtyard. "Young man, what's wrong?" Kazuki couldn't speak. He bent double, hands on his knees, struggling to catch his breath. When he finally straightened up, he saw that the temple grounds were busy with visitors, tourists taking photos, pilgrims praying, a group of school children on a field trip. Normal, safe, real. "Sorry," he gasped. "Thought I saw a bear." The attendant looked skeptical, but didn't press the issue. "Well, you're safe now. Bears rarely approach the temples. Too many people." Kazuki nodded gratefully and moved deeper into the temple grounds, finding a quiet corner where he could sit and collect himself. His hands were still coated with grains of salt, which he wiped on his pants. What had he seen? Not a Shibito, at least not like the robed figures in his photographs. Something else. Something worse. He pulled out his phone, relieved to see he had a signal. Without thinking, he opened the camera app to check if it had captured anything unusual. What he saw made his blood freeze. There were dozens of new photos in his gallery that he hadn't taken. Dark, blurry images of the forest path he'd just traveled. And in each one, barely visible among the trees, were the robed figures. The Shibito, watching, following, and in the final image, a photo of himself sitting exactly where he was now, taken seconds ago from directly in front of him, looking up at the camera with an expression of terror. Kazuki's head snapped up, but there was no one there. Just tourists and pilgrims, none of them paying him any attention. His phone chimed, indicating a new message. With trembling fingers, he opened it. It was from an unknown number. The text contained only 3 characters. Before he could process this, a notification banner slid down from the top of his screen. An email from his sister May, sent just minutes ago. "Hey, what's with the weird picture sending?" Are you okay? Kazuki felt a wave of cold sweat break out across his skin. He hadn't sent May any photos. He'd specifically told her he would send some later. He quickly opened his messaging app. There, in his conversation with May, were dozens of images, all the strange photos from his gallery, sent one after another over the past hour. But he hadn't sent them. He'd been walking, running, the phone secure in his pocket. A sudden commotion drew his attention. The group of school children were gathered around one of their classmates, who had collapsed to the ground. Teachers rushed to help as the child convulsed, body twisting unnaturally. Kazuki watched in horror as the child's face contorted, eyes rolling back to show only whites. Then the child spoke, but the voice that emerged was not a child's voice. It was ancient, rasping like dry leaves scraping against stone. Kazuki Takahashi. It said, the words perfectly audible across the temple courtyard despite being barely more than a whisper. The path ends where it begins. Return, return, return. The child went limp. People were shouting now. Someone calling for an ambulance. Kazuki stood frozen, unable to move, unable to look away. When the child's eyes opened again, they fixed directly on Kazuki. A smile spread across the young face, too wide, revealing too many teeth. Then the child raised one hand and pointed, just as the figure in the stream had done. Every person in the courtyard, tourists, pilgrims, teachers of the children, turned as one to look at Kazuki. Their faces were blank, eyes empty, and as Kazuki watched, paralyzed with terror, shadows began to form behind each of them. Tall, robed figures with wide-brimmed hats, emerging from nowhere, stepping into reality from some unseen place. The Shibito had returned, and they had brought friends. Chapter 3, The Return. Kazuki's instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs wouldn't respond. He stood frozen as every person in the temple courtyard stared at him with vacant eyes. The shadowy figures of Shibito looming behind him like dark guardian angels. His phone buzzed continuously in his hand. Messages from May, probably worried about the strange photos. But he couldn't look away from the horrifying tableau before him. The spell broke when the temple bell began to toll. Deep, resonant sounds that seemed to physically push back the shadows. With each toll, the people in the courtyard blinked, confusion replacing the vacancy in their eyes. The dark figure behind them wavered, becoming less distinct. Kazuki didn't wait to see more. He turned and ran, heading for the temple gate. Behind him, normalcy seemed to be returning. He could hear concerned voices, someone calling for a doctor for a collapsed child, tourists resuming their conversations. But he didn't look back, couldn't look back. The small town beyond the temple was just waking up to twilight life. Shopkeepers turning on lights, restaurant preparing for dinner service. Kazuki ran past them all, searching for a hotel, a guest house, anywhere he could lock himself away. He found a modern business hotel on the town's main street, the kind of anonymous place that catered to traveling salesmen and tourists passing through. The young woman at the reception desk barely looked up from her computer as he checked in, handing over his credit card with shaking hands. "Just one night?" she asked, typing his information into the system. "Yes," Kazuki replied, then changed his mind. "Actually, no. I need to catch the first train out tomorrow. What time does it leave?" The receptionist checked her computer. First train to Matsuyama is at 6:17 a.m. You'll need to be at the station by 6 o'clock. "I'll take it. Can you book me a ticket?" She looked surprised but nodded. "Of course. Will that be one way or round trip?" One way. Kazuki had never been more certain of anything in his life. He was getting out of Shikoku and never coming back. Once in his room, Kazuki locked the door, then jammed a chair under the handle for good measure. He closed the curtains without looking outside, then sat on the edge of the bed, his phone clutched in his hand. He had 17 missed calls from May and dozens of text messages. With a deep breath, he called her back. She answered on the first ring. Kazu, what the hell? Are you okay? Were those photos? I'm fine, he lied, his voice surprisingly steady. What photos are you talking about? Don't play dumb. The weird ones you've been sending all day. People in robes, blurry forest shots. Her voice dropped. And that last one with the kid in the stream. What was wrong with his face? Kazuki's blood ran cold. You can see them? In the photos? See what? The people in robes? Yeah, obviously. What's? See what? The people in robes? Yeah, obviously. What's going on, Kazu? Are you in some kind of cult thing up there? Kazuki's mind raced. Make it see them. The Shibito were visible to others in the photos, not just to him. That meant they were real, not hallucinations, not his imagination. It's complicated, he said finally. I'm coming home tomorrow. First train out. Good, May said, relief evident in her voice. Mom's worried too. I showed her the pictures and she started crying. She hesitated. Kazu, the message you sent with that last photo, what did you mean? What message? His throat went dry. You wrote, they're coming for me. Tell Mom I'm sorry. Kazuki's hand tightened on the phone. I didn't send that, May. A long silence followed. When May spoke again, her voice was small. You're scaring me. I'm scared too, he admitted. But I'll be home tomorrow. We'll talk then. I promise. After ending the call, Kazuki placed his phone face down on the nightstand and took a long, hot shower, trying to wash away the events of the day. But no amount of hot water could erase the memory of those blank faces all turning toward him in unison, or the dark figures looming behind them. When he emerged from the bathroom, his phone was face up on the nightstand, the screen glowing with notifications. He was certain he'd left it face down. With deep reluctance, he picked it up. 27 new photos in his gallery, all taken within the last few minutes while he'd been in the shower. Photos of his hotel room from various angles. Photos of the bathroom door, closed, with steam escaping from underneath. Photos of himself in the shower, taken through the opaque glass door. Kazuki dropped the phone as if it had burned him. His heart hammered against his ribs as he scanned the room. Nothing seemed out of place. No one was there, but someone, something, had been just minutes ago. He couldn't stay here. Nowhere was safe. He dressed quickly, shoving his belongings into his backpack. As he reached for his phone, it began to ring, an unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. Hello. His voice shook. A familiar rasping voice spoke. The old woman from the forest shrine. Ohenro-san, you can complete your journey. How did you get this number? A soft laugh. The Shibito see all paths, all possibilities. A pause. They're very interested in you, Kazuki Takahashi, more than most. What do they want from me? Want? Nothing so simple. He could almost hear her shrug. They exist outside time as we know it. They see the roads not taken, the lives unlived, and sometimes they offer alternatives. I don't understand. No, you wouldn't. The old woman's voice softened. You stand at a crossroads, young pilgrim. The life you've built in Tokyo. Is it truly the one you want? Or is there another path calling to you? Kazuki thought his cramped apartment, his demanding job, the endless cycle of work and brief, exhausted weekends. Was that really all there was? What if I say no? What if I just want them to leave me alone? Then place another offering at the boundary shrine. Return to the place where you first saw them clearly and make your choice known. The old woman's voice grew distant, as if she were moving away from the phone. But know this, once refused, their invitation will never come again. The line went dead. Kazuki stared at his phone for a long moment. Then he looked up at the hotel room door. Beyond it lay the path to the train station, to Tokyo, to his normal life. But was that what he wanted? Had he come to Shikoku seeking something more than just a break from routine? The Shibito had chosen him. For what purpose, he couldn't say. But they had marked him, and now he had to decide, run from them or face them. With sudden clarity, Kazuki knew what he had to do. He would return to the Boundary Shrine. Tonight, he checked the time, just past 8 p.m. If he hurried, he could make it back up the mountain before midnight. He wasn't sure why that seemed important, but somehow he knew he needed to be there when one day turned into the next. Before leaving, he sent a text to May. "Don't worry. Everything will be fine. I love you." Then he turned off his phone and placed it on the hotel bed. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't need it. The night was clear and cool as Kazuki left the town behind, following the pilgrimage route back the way he had come. The path was well marked with reflective signs that caught his flashlight beam, guiding him upward into the mountains. He passed Horinji Temple, now closed and silent for the night. Beyond it, the forest closing around him, the trees forming a tunnel that swallowed the light. Kazuki kept moving, driven by a strange mix of fear and anticipation. When he reached the wooden bridge where he had seen the child thing in the stream, he paused. The water below gurgled and splashed against the rocks, its surface reflecting the starlight. Nothing stood in the stream now. Nothing that he could see, at least. "I know you're watching," he said aloud. "I'm coming to the shrine. I'll be there at midnight." No response came except the whisper of wind through the trees. But as he continued along the path, Kazuki could feel eyes on him, not hostile, but intensely curious. Something was following him, pacing him just beyond the range of his flashlight. 2 hours later, breathing hard from the climb, he reached a fork in the trail where the main path split from a smaller route to the Boundary Shrine. Without hesitation, he took the forest path, his flashlight beam bobbing ahead of him through the darkness. The shrine looked exactly as it had the night before, a simple wooden structure nestled against a massive cedar tree. But tonight, something was different. The air around it seemed to shimmer slightly, like heat waves rising from sun-baked asphalt. Kazuki approached slowly, his flashlight revealing details he had missed before. The wood of the shrine wasn't weathered as he had initially thought. It was perfectly preserved, despite its obvious age. The grain of the wood swirled in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, forming symbols he couldn't quite read. And there, on the small offering platform, sat the stone pilgrim figure he had found the previous morning, waiting for him. Kazuki switched off his flashlight, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness. Moonlight filtered through the branches overhead, casting dappled shadows across the shrine and the surrounding forest. "I'm here," he said, his voice sounding small in the vast silence. "I've returned." At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, he became aware of movement among the trees. Dark shapes detaching themselves from the deeper shadows, approaching with silent grace. The Shibito, they formed a circle around him in the shrine, their faces hidden beneath the wide brims of their traditional hats. In the moonlight, Kazuki could make out their hands, pale, elongated, with too many joints in the fingers. One of the figures stepped forward. Unlike the others, this one's face was visible beneath its hat, the face of the old woman who had given him the amulet. "You've chosen to return," she said, her voice no longer that of an elderly Japanese woman, but something deeper, older. "Few do. What are you?" Kazuki asked. "What do you want from me?" "We are the forgotten," the thing wearing the old woman's face said. "Those who walked different paths. Those who made different choices." It gestured at the other robed figures. "Some of us were pilgrims once. Some were monks. Some were gods of these mountains before the Buddha's teachings reached these shores. It tilted its head, studying Kazuki with eyes that reflected the moonlight like a cat's. All of us chose to step beyond the boundaries of the world you know. And you want to join you? To become one of you? A sound like dry leaves rustling. Laughter. Kazuki realized with chill. Not exactly. We offer a gift few receive. The chance to see the other lives you might have lived. The paths not taken. The Shibito around him began to move, circling slowly. As they moved, the forest seemed to blur, the trees becoming indistinct. Images flickered between the dark figures, snapshots of other realities. Kazuki saw himself in monk's robes, tending a temple garden, his face serene and weathered by years of sun and wind. He saw himself as an old man, surrounded by grandchildren in a traditional farmhouse, laugh lines etched deeply around his eyes. He saw himself as a successful businessman, boarding a private jet, dozens of possible Kazukis, dozens of paths not taken. These are lives you might have lived, the thing wherein the old woman's face said. Lives you might still live if you choose differently. What's the catch? Kazuki asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What do you get out of this? We feed on possibilities, on choices unmade, on regrets and what-ifs. The creature's smile widened, showing too many teeth. In return, we offer clarity, understanding, the chance to truly choose your path with open eyes. It extended one long-fingered hand toward the shrine. Place your hand on the offering stone. See the lives you might have lived, then decide. Kazuki hesitated. And if I refuse, then walk away. Return to Tokyo, to the life you know. The creature's eyes glinted. But know that you chose it, that you saw the alternatives and rejected them. The circle of Shibito continued to move, the images flickering between them growing more vivid, more enticing. Kazuki saw himself happy in ways he had never imagined. He saw himself fulfilled, purposeful, connected to something larger than himself. But he also saw darker possibilities, versions of himself consumed by greed, by anger, by despair. Every choice led to joy and pain in equal measure, to gains and losses unique to each path. With trembling hands, Kazuki reached for the stone pilgrim on the shrine. The moment his fingers touched it, the world exploded into light and sound. He was everywhere and nowhere at once. He was a child again, making different choices at every pivotal moment of his life. He was an old man looking back on 100 different lives lived. He was dying and being born, failing and succeeding, loving and losing all simultaneously. Through it all ran a constant truth. There was no perfect path, no life without regret, no choice without sacrifice. When the visions faded, Kazuki found himself on his knees before the shrine, tears streaming down his face. The Shibito still surrounded him, waiting silently. I understand now, he whispered. Every path has value. Every choice matters. Yes, the creature wearing the old woman's face said. Now choose. Kazuki rose to his feet, a strange calm settling over him. He looked around at the circle of robed figures, at the shrine, at the forest that suddenly seemed alive with possibility. I choose my own path, he said firmly. Not the one laid out for me by society, not one shown to me by you. One I forge myself, with eyes open to the consequences. The Shibito were silent for a long moment. Then, as one, they bowed to him. A wise choice, the leader said. The only true choice. The figures began to fade, becoming transparent in the moonlight. But before they disappeared completely, the leader spoke one last time. We will watch your journey with interest, Kazuki Takahashi. May your path bring you the peace you seek. Then they were gone, leaving Kazuki alone before the shrine. The stone pilgrim figure had vanished as well, replaced by a simple wooden amulet carved with a single character. Path. Kazuki picked it up, feeling its weight in his palm. It was warm, as if it had been sitting in sunlight rather than moonlight. As dawn broke over the mountains, Kazuki began the long walk back to the town. But this time, he wasn't hurrying to catch a train. He had decisions to make, calls to place, arrangements to configure. His pilgrimage was just beginning. Chapter 4, The Path Chosen. 3 days later, Kazuki sat cross-legged on the tatami floor of a small room at Ryozenji Temple, the first official station of the Shikoku pilgrimage. Before him sat the head monk, Tanaka Hiroshi, a man in his 60s with keen eyes and a surprisingly youthful smile. "So," the monk said, sipping his tea, "you wish to stay and learn. May I ask why?" Kazuki considered the question carefully. Since his encounter with the Shibito at the Boundary Shrine, he had made some dramatic decisions. He had called his boss in Tokyo to resign, arranged for his sister to pack up his apartment, and committed to staying in Shikoku for the foreseeable future. The monk waited patiently, seemingly content to sit in silence until Kazuki found his answer. "I saw something in these mountains," Kazuki said finally. "Something that showed me possibilities I never considered." He looked down at the wooden amulet he now wore around his neck. "I realized the path I was on wasn't truly chosen. It was just a default, the expected course. I want to learn to live with intention, with awareness." Tanaka-san nodded slowly. "Many come to the pilgrimage seeking transformation. Few find it as dramatically as you seem to have." His eyes twinkled with something like amusement. "The Shibito chose well." Kazuki's head snapped up. "You know about them?" "Of course. I've been the keeper of Ryozenji for 30 years. The monk gestured around them. "These temples have stood for centuries, bearing witness to things beyond ordinary understanding." He leaned forward slightly. "The Shibito appear to those at crossroads, those with the potential to change their lives completely. They rarely make mistakes in their selections." "What are they really?" Kazuki asked. "They said they were the forgotten, but that doesn't explain anything." Tanaka-san took another sip of tea before answering. "There are spaces between the world we know and other places. The Shibito exist in those spaces, watching, occasionally interacting when conditions are right." He shrugged. "Some believe they are former pilgrims who found a different path. Others say they are much older, spirits of the mountains from before Buddhism came to Japan. The truth? Perhaps something of both." Kazuki thought of the visions he had experienced, the countless possible lives unfolding before him like leaves on a tree. "They showed me what might have been, what still could be." "A rare gift," the monk said, nodding. "Most people live their entire lives never truly seeing the consequences of their choices, the branching paths of possibility." He studied Kazuki with new interest. "And what did you learn from this vision?" "That there's no perfect path," Kazuki replied without hesitation. "Every choice brings joy and pain, gain and loss. The only failure is not choosing consciously." Tanaka-san smiled broadly, a wisdom some spend lifetimes seeking. He set down his teacup. "You may stay, Takahashi-san. We can always use help maintaining the temple grounds. And if you wish to learn our practices, I will teach you." "Thank you," Kazuki said, bowing deeply. "But," the monk added, raising a finger, "do not expect to find all your answers here. The temple is just one possible path among many. It may be right for you for a time, but perhaps not forever." "I understand." "Good. You'll begin tomorrow. For today, rest. The encounter with the Shibito takes a toll, even on the young." As Kazuki rose to leave, the monk spoke again. "One more thing. Your phone. I suggest you use it only when necessary. The Shibito have marked you now. They can find you through such devices." Kazuki thought of the strange photos, the messages he hadn't sent. He nodded. I was planning to get rid of it anyway. That evening, Kazuki walked to the edge of the temple grounds where a small stream ran down from the mountains. He took out his phone, his last connection to his old life, and turned it on one final time. There were dozens of messages from May, increasingly worried as he hadn't responded for days. There were emails from his former boss, ranging from angry to concerned. There were notifications from social media accounts he no longer cared about. Kazuki sent a single message to May, explaining that he was safe, that he had decided to stay in Shikoku for a while, that he would call her from the temple's landline once a week. Then he powered off the phone, removed the SIM card, and dropped the device into the stream. He watched as the current carried it away, a small black rectangle vanishing into the gathering darkness. As he turned to head back to the temple, Kazuki noticed a figure standing among the trees at the forest's edge. A dark silhouette in traditional robes, hat tilted low. It raised one pale hand in what might have been a farewell. Kazuki nodded in acknowledgement. Then the figure faded back into the shadows, leaving no trace of its presence. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that Kazuki found surprisingly comfortable. He woke before dawn each day, joining the monks for morning meditation and chanting. During the day, he worked on the temple grounds, sweeping the paths, tending the gardens, helping with minor repairs to the ancient buildings. In the evenings, Tanaka-san taught him the basics of Buddhist philosophy and practice. Kazuki wasn't sure he believed in all of it, but the emphasis on mindfulness, on being fully present in each moment, resonated deeply with the insights he had gained from the Shibito's visions. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between tasks or during his solitary walks around the temple grounds at dusk, Kazuki would catch glimpses of them, dark figures at the edge of his vision, gone when he turned to look directly, not threatening, just watching, waiting. He kept his promise to call May once a week. At first, she was frantic with worry, convinced he had joined a cult or suffered a mental breakdown. But as the weeks passed and he remained consistent in his calls, her concern gradually transformed into cautious support. "You sound different," she told him during their 5th weekly call. "Calmer. More, I don't know." Centered. "I feel different," Kazuki admitted. "Clearer. Like I'm finally awake after sleepwalking for years." "Mom still thinks you've lost it," May said, but he could hear the smile in her voice. "But if you're happy, I am. For now, at least." Kazuki looked out at the temple garden, where cherry blossoms were giving way to fresh green leaves. "I don't know if this is forever, but it's right for now." 1 month into his stay, Tanaka-san summoned Kazuki to his private study, a small room lined with ancient scrolls and modern books on equal footing. The monk sat behind a low table, a familiar object placed before him. "Do you recognize this?" he asked as Kazuki entered. It was a stone pilgrim figure, the one that had been at the boundary shrine the night Kazuki encountered the Shibito, the one that had disappeared and been replaced by the wooden amulet he now wore. "Yes," Kazuki said, taking a seat across from the monk, "but I thought it was gone." "It always returns," Tanaka-san said. "It has been passed between the Shibito and the temples for centuries." He pushed it across the table toward Kazuki. "Examine it carefully." Kazuki picked up the stone figure. It was heavier than it looked. The stone warmed to the touch as if it had been sitting in sunlight despite the dimness of the study. The carving was simple but evocative. A robed pilgrim with a wide-brimmed hat, face hidden in shadow. As he turned it over in his hands, Kazuki noticed something on the base, a series of symbols carved into the stone, too worn to decipher clearly. "What do these mean?" he asked. "They are names," Tanaka-san replied. "The names of those who have been chosen by the Shibito over the centuries, those who have seen the paths not taken." He pointed to a fresher carving near the edge. "And there is yours." Kazuki peered closer. Sure enough, there were his characters, etched into the ancient stone. Why are you showing me this? He asked, placing the figure back on the table. Tanaka-san's expression grew serious. Because you have a decision to make. The Shibito rarely choose someone without purpose. They showed you the paths not taken, and you chose to forge your own. The monk leaned forward, but that was only the beginning. I don't understand. The boundary between worlds is thinning. Takahashi-san, the spaces where the Shibito dwell, are drawing closer to our reality. Tanaka-san gestured toward the window, where twilight was gathering. They have chosen you as a bridge, someone who can walk between the worlds. Kazuki felt a chill run down his spine. What does that mean? What I have to do? Learn from them. Learn to see as they see, beyond the limitations of time and space, beyond the single path most humans perceive. The monk's eyes were intense. And then teach others. Guide those who stand at crossroads as you were guided. You mean become like them? Kazuki's voice wavered. Become a Shibito? No. Remain human, but with expanded awareness. A walker between worlds. Tanaka-san sat back. It is a rare honor, and a heavy responsibility. Kazuki thought of his life before. The cramped apartment, the meaningless job, the constant low-grade anxiety about the future. Then he thought of the visions the Shibito had shown him, the infinite branching paths of possibility. What if I refuse? He asked. Then you remain as you are. Continue your life here, or return to Tokyo, or find some other path. The choice is yours. Tanaka-san smiled slightly. That is the point, after all. And if I accept, then your training begins. With me and with them. The monk nodded toward the window. Kazuki turned to look. There, standing in the temple garden beneath the cherry trees, were 3 robed figures, their wide-brimmed hats tilted up to reveal faces that were almost, but not quite, human. They were watching the window, waiting for his decision. How long do I have to decide? Kazuki asked, turning back to the monk. Until sunrise, Tanaka-san replied. The Shibito are patient in many things, but once they extend an invitation, they expect a prompt answer. Kazuki spent that night in meditation, sitting in the small room he had been assigned. He thought about everything that had led him to this moment, his dissatisfaction with his old life, his impulse to walk the pilgrimage route, his encounters with the Boundary Shrine and the Shibito. Had it all been leading to this? Had they been guiding him all along? As the first gray light of dawn filtered through his window, Kazuki made his decision. He rose, washed his face in the basin, and changed into the simple robes Tanaka-san had provided him when he first arrived at the temple. The monk was waiting for him in the main hall, kneeling before the temple's central Buddha statue. The stone pilgrim figure sat on the altar beside him. You decided. Tanaka-san said as Kazuki knelt beside him. It wasn't a question. Yes, Kazuki replied. I accept. The monk nodded, unsurprised. Good. Your training begins today. He handed Kazuki a small bundle wrapped in silk. These are the texts you will study first. Some Buddhist, some much older. They will help prepare your mind for what comes next. And what comes next? Tanaka-san smiled enigmatically. The Shibito will show you when you're ready. He rose to his feet. For now, continue your duties at the temple. Meditate on the texts I've given you. And pay attention to your dreams. They will try to reach you there first. That night, Kazuki dreamed of the Boundary Shrine. In the dream, he stood before it as a circle of robed figures moved around him, their faces hidden beneath their hats. But unlike in reality, the shrine itself spoke to him, its wooden boards shifting to form a mouth. The paths are many, it said in a voice like rustling leaves. The journey is one. Walk with open eyes, Kazuki Takahashi. Walk with us. The circle of Shibito grew closer, their robes brushing against him. One by one, They removed their hats, revealing faces that mirrored his own, versions of himself from different paths, different choices, different lives. They smiled at him with shared understanding. "We are you," they said in unison. "You are us. All possibilities exist simultaneously. Learn to see them." When Kazuki woke, the room was filled with a soft, pulsing light that seemed to emanate from the wooden amulet around his neck. The character for Path glowed briefly, then faded back to normal as sunrise banished the last shadows of night. He knew, with absolute certainty, that his life had changed forever. Whatever came next, there was no going back to the person he had been before. The path forward would not be easy. It would require sacrifice, discipline, a complete rewiring of how he perceived reality. But for the first time in his life, Kazuki felt he was exactly where he was meant to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The Shibito had chosen well. Chapter 5, Between Worlds. 5 years passed like the turning of a single page. Kazuki Takahashi, once a dissatisfied office worker from Tokyo, had become something else entirely. Not quite a monk, though he still lived at Ryozenji Temple. Not quite a Shibito, though he had learned to walk the spaces between worlds. He existed in a state of in-between, and found it suited him perfectly. His training had been rigorous and strange. Tanaka-san had taught him ancient meditation techniques that allowed him to perceive reality from multiple perspectives simultaneously. The Shibito had shown him how to step sideways out of the normal flow of time, to observe moments from outside their boundaries. Most importantly, he had learned to see the branching paths of possibility around every person he encountered. The shimmering web of choices made and unmade, lives lived and unlived. Now, it was Kazuki's turn to guide others. The young woman sitting across from him in the temple garden looked skeptical, her modern clothes and digital camera marking her as a tourist rather than a pilgrim. She had introduced herself as Emi Nakano, a photographer from Osaka working on a series about traditional pilgrimages in modern Japan. "So you're saying these temples are, what, portals of other dimensions?" she asked, one eyebrow raised. Kazuki smiled. Her skepticism was familiar. He had felt the same when he first arrived. Not exactly. The temples are anchors, points of stability in a fluid reality. The spaces between them, that's where the boundaries grow thin. He could see the branching paths around her, faint but unmistakable, versions of Emmy who had chosen different careers, different relationships, different beliefs. They hovered like ghostly overlays, each equally real and unreal. One path in particular glowed brighter than the others, a version of Emmy who had experienced something profound, something that had altered her perspective completely. That was the potential the Shibito had noticed. That was why they had guided her here, to him. "You took photos at several temples, yes?" Kazuki asked. Emmy nodded, lifting her professional camera. "For my project, I've been documenting the entire pilgrimage route. And have you noticed anything unusual in those photos? Anything that wasn't there when you took them?" Her expression shifted from skepticism to wariness. "How did you know about that?" "The Shibito choose carefully," Kazuki said. "They appear to those ready to see beyond the single path." Emmy hesitated, then reached for her camera. With quick movements, she navigated to a particular set of images and turned the display toward Kazuki. There they were, the familiar dark-robed figures, standing in the backgrounds of her temple photos. In each successive image, they stood closer to her, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats. "At first I thought it was some weird glitch," Emmy said, her voice lower now. "Or maybe actual people I hadn't noticed. But then," she swiped to the last image. It was a selfie taken at a temple gate. Emmy smiling at the camera. Directly behind her stood a robed figure, its hand resting on her shoulder, a hand with too many joints in the fingers, pale as moonlight. "I felt it," she whispered. When I took this picture, I felt something touch me, but when I turned around, no one was there. She looked up at Kazuki, fear and fascination warring in her eyes. What are they? What do they want from me? Kazuki reached into his robe and withdrew the wooden amulet he had carried for 5 years. The character for a path had been joined by others over time, forming a complex mandala of possibilities. They are the forgotten, he said, repeating the words that had been spoken to him at the Boundary Shrine. Those who walk different paths. And they offer a gift you receive, the chance to see the other lives you might have lived, the paths not taken. He held out the amulet. There's a shrine in the forest, not marked on any map. If you wish to see what they offer, place this on the altar at midnight tonight. I will guide you there. Emi stared at the amulet, then at Kazuki. And if I refuse, if I delete these photos and go back to Osaka, then that is your choice. Kazuki said simply, one path among many. She hesitated, then reached for the amulet. As her fingers touched the wood, Kazuki saw the bright path around her pulse and strengthened. The Shibito had chosen well again. I'll go, Emi said. Show me this shrine. That night, under a full moon that painted the forest silver, Kazuki led Emi along the path to the Boundary Shrine. The way was different now, shorter, more direct. The shrine existed in a place that bent and folded depending on who approached it and why. For Kazuki, who had walked between worlds for 5 years, the journey took mere minutes. For Emi, experiencing for the first time, each step seemed to cross vast distances. It feels like we've been walking for hours, she said, though they had left the temple only moments before. And the forest, it's different somehow. Time and space bend near the boundaries, Kazuki explained. What seems like a short distance in one world may cross entire realms in another. The Boundary Shrine appeared before them, unchanged since the night Kazuki had made his own choice. The simple wooden structure nestled against a massive cedar tree, its surfaces carved with symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. And waiting around it, arranged in a perfect circle, stood the Shibito. Their robes rippled in a wind that touched nothing else, their faces hidden beneath their hats. But Kazuki could see them clearly now, the infinite variations, the countless possibilities gathered in one place. Emi gasped, instinctively stepping closer to Kazuki. They're real, she whispered. I thought maybe I was losing my mind. Reality is more flexible than most people realize, Kazuki said gently. What you see is just one layer of what exists. One of the Shibitos stepped forward. The leader, the one who had worn the old woman's face when speaking to Kazuki years ago. Now it wore a different aspect, appearing as a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a weathered face. Emi Nakano, it said, its voice like wind to autumn leaves. You stand at a crossroads. Emi's hand tightened on Kazuki's arm. How does it know my name? They know all the paths your life might take, Kazuki explained. All the choices, all the possibilities. The leader of a Shibito gestured toward the shrine. Place the amulet. See what we offer. Emi looked at Kazuki, who nodded encouragingly with trembling hands. She approached the shrine and placed a wooden amulet on its weathered surface. The moment it touched the wood, the air around them shimmered like heat waves. The forest seemed to blur, the trees becoming indistinct, the boundaries between solid objects growing fluid. Images flickered between the dark figures, snapshots of other realities. Emi gasped as she saw herself in countless variations, living countless lives. A celebrated photographer whose work hung in international galleries. A teacher guiding young artists. A mother of 3. A solitary traveler documenting the remote corners of the world. Dozens of possible Emmys. Dozens of paths not taken. These are lives you might have lived, the leader of the Shibito said. Lives you might still live if you choose differently. Tears streamed down Emmy's face as she watched the possibilities unfold. "They're all me," she whispered. "All these different lives. All equally valid," Kazuki said. "All equally real in their own way." The visions intensified, showing not just variations of Emmy, but the consequences of each choice. The ripples are different paths sent to the lives of others. People she helped, people she hurt, lives she touched in ways both profound and subtle. Finally, the images faded, leaving Emmy kneeling before the shrine, her hands pressed to her face as she tried to process what she had witnessed. The leader of the Shibito stepped forward again. "Now you have seen. The question remains, what will you choose?" Emmy looked up, her eyes wide and glistening with tears. "How can I possibly choose? There's so many paths, so many possibilities. That is the burden and the gift of awareness," the Shibito said. "To see all paths but walk only one." Kazuki knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to decide everything now. The awareness itself is the first step." Emmy turned to him, understanding dawning on her face. "That's what happened to you, isn't it? You saw all these possibilities and you chose this." She gestured at his robes, at the shrine, at the circle of Shibito watching silently. "You chose to become a guide." Kazuki nodded. "It was the path that called to me most strongly. But your path may be entirely different." The leader of the Shibito raised a pale, long-fingered hand. "There's another possibility," it said, its voice rustling through the night air. "One we offer rarely." Even Kazuki looked surprised. The Shibito were deviating from their usual pattern. This was something new. "The boundaries are thinning," the leader continued. "The worlds draw closer. Soon, many will begin to glimpse what lies between, whether they are prepared or not." It turned its hidden face toward Emmy. "We need more than guides now. We need bridges. Those who can walk fully in both worlds and help others understand what they're seeing." "What does that mean exactly?" Emmy asked, rising to her feet. "It means you will retain your life as it is, your work, your connections, your place in the world you know. But you would also learn to perceive and navigate the spaces between. To document not just a physical pilgrimage, but the spiritual boundaries it crosses." The Shibito's voice softened. "You will become our lens, our interpreter to a world increasingly ill-equipped to understand the unseen." Emmy's hand went instinctively to her camera, which hung around her neck. "You want me to photograph the in-between? To show others what I've seen tonight?" In a manner of speaking, the leader said, "Though the camera is merely a tool, the true lens is your awareness, your willingness to see beyond the obvious." Kazuki watched the exchange with growing understanding. The Shibito were evolving their approach, adapting to changing circumstances. They had chosen him to be a traditional guide, someone who helped individuals at crucial crossroads. But they were choosing Emmy for something new, a bridge between worlds, someone who could reach many at once. "It won't be easy," Kazuki warned her. "Walking between worlds requires sacrifice, discipline. My current path isn't easy either," Emmy replied with unexpected firmness. "I've spent years trying to show people what they don't see, trying to capture moments of transition and transformation." She turned to face the circle of Shibito. "If what you're offering is a way to do that more deeply, more truly, then I accept." The leader of the Shibito bowed slightly. "The choice is made." The wooden amulet on the shrine began to glow, the character for a path burning bright before transforming into a new symbol, one Kazuki had never seen before, complex and flowing. Before their eyes, the amulet split into two identical pieces, one remaining on the shrine, the other floating toward Emmy. She reached out hesitantly, then grasped it. The moment her fingers closed around the wood, a visible wave of energy pulsed outward from the shrine, rippling through the forest. Emmy gasped, her eyes widening. "Everything's different," she whispered. I can see so much more. Kazuki understood. Her perception had expanded, just as it had 5 years ago, but whereas training had taken months of gradual adjustment, Emi had been thrust immediately into full awareness. The Shibito were indeed taking a new approach. What you see now is the overlap, he explained. The places where multiple realities touch, where choices branch and converge. Emi turned slowly, taking in the transformed forest. To her newly awakened senses, the trees were not just trees, but expressions of possibility. Each branch a different potential outcome. Each leaf a life in miniature. The Shibito themselves appeared differently now. Not just robed figures, but windows into other realities, each one containing multitudes. It's overwhelming, she said, her voice shaking slightly. It will become clearer with time. The leader of the Shibito assured her. You will learn to focus your perception, to see what needs to be seen. Kazuki recognized that this was his cue. I'll help you, he said. That's what I'm here for, to guide those who walk new paths. The leader nodded approvingly. The first bridge in her guide, it said. Others will follow when they are ready. It gestured to the circle of Shibito, who began to fade into the forest, becoming transparent until only their outlines remained, barely visible against the trees. We will watch and wait and choose carefully. Soon only the leader remained, its form growing increasingly indistinct. The journey continues, it said, the familiar phrase echoing through the clearing before it too vanished from sight. Emi and Kazuki stood alone before the boundary shrine, the split amulet glowing softly in Emi's palm. The forest around them still shimmered with expanded reality, multiple possibilities overlapping like double-exposed photographs. What happens now? Emi asked, turning to Kazuki. Now, he said with a small smile, your real training begins. You'll need to learn to navigate between worlds without losing yourself, to document what you see in ways others can understand. He gestured back toward the path that would take them to the temple, and I suspect you'll need to update your photography project quite significantly. Emi laughed, a sound of nervous excitement. From traditional pilgrimages in modern Japan to photographing reality's thin places, my editor's gonna think I've lost my mind. Perhaps, Kazuki agreed, or perhaps they'll see something in your work that speaks to them on a level they don't fully understand. That's how it begins, with a glimpse, a moment of recognition that there might be more to reality than what we typically perceive. They began walking back toward the temple, the path now visible to both of them as not just a physical route, but a corridor of possibility, shimmering with potential futures. Will I still be able to live my normal life? Emi asked, go back to Osaka, see my friends, finish my projects? Yes, though normal will take on a new meaning, Kazuki replied. You'll see the branching paths around everyone you meet. You'll notice the thin places where worlds overlap. It will change how you interact with everything and everyone. He smiled. But that's the point, isn't it? To see more clearly, to choose more consciously. Emi nodded, her initial fear giving way to determination. I've always wanted my photography to reveal hidden truths. This is just a much deeper level of that. As they walked, Kazuki found himself reflecting on his own journey, from dissatisfied office worker to temple resident to guide between worlds. The path had not been what he expected when he first set out on that solitary pilgrimage 5 years ago. It had been both harder and more rewarding than he could have imagined. Now, with Emi beside him representing a new evolution in the Shibito's approach, he sensed that his own role was changing as well. No longer just a guide for individuals at crossroads, but a teacher for those who would become bridges themselves. The world was changing. The boundaries were thinning. More people would begin to glimpse what lay between the solid fact of reality, the infinite possibilities, the paths not taken. the choices unmade. Some would be frightened. Some would deny what they saw. But others, like Emmy, would embrace the expanded awareness, using it to create new connections, new understandings. As the first light of dawn filtered through the trees, Kazuki and Emmy emerged from the forest onto the temple grounds. The familiar buildings looked different now, overlaid with their own histories and futures. Every repair, every addition, every potential change visible as ghostly outlines around the solid structures. "It's beautiful," Emmy whispered, seeing the temple complex through her newly awakened perception. Kazuki nodded. "Yes, reality always is, when you can see all of it." Tanaka-san was waiting for them at the temple gate, his elderly face serene. He bowed to Emmy, then turned to Kazuki with a knowing smile. "The first bridge has been chosen," the old monk said, "and more will follow. The time we are prepared for is beginning." Kazuki returned the bow. "Yes, master. The boundaries are thinning." "Good." Tanaka-san said, surprising them both. "It is time for worlds to remember their connections." He gestured for them to follow him into the temple complex. "Come, there is much to discuss, much to prepare." As they walked to the gate, Kazuki felt a profound sense of rightness, of being exactly where and when he was meant to be. 5 years ago, standing at his own crossroads, he could never have imagined this outcome. Yet here he was, helping to guide the next evolution in humanity's perception of reality. Behind them, at the forest edge, a line of robed figures briefly appeared. The Shibito, watching their chosen ones enter the temple. Then they faded once more into the spaces between, into thin places where worlds overlapped, where all possibilities existed simultaneously. Their work was just beginning. The path continued. And somewhere in Tokyo, a young office worker stared out at the crowded streets below her company's high-rise, feeling an inexplicable pull toward the distant mountains of Shikoku. Soon, she would book a solo trip to walk an ancient pilgrimage route. Soon, she would take photographs of temples and shrines, not knowing what other figures might appear in her images. Soon, she would stand at her own crossroads, faced with choices she never knew existed. The Shibito were patient. They had all the time in the world, and all the worlds in time. The journey continues.